Hello and welcome. Has it become normal for Americans to fear Muslims as fanatics? And if so, what has driven this blind prejudice and intolerance? Could there actually be some foundation for those fears based on the repeated actions of extremists in the United States?
As a matter of fact, I know quite a few Marines who will be very happy to help these terrorists to an early meeting in paradise.
The most popular name in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, this was in the news this week, for babies this year was Muhammad. Am I a racist to feel I'm alarmed by that? Because I am.
Islam is a violent, I was going to say religion, but it's not a religion. It's a political system. It's a violent political system bent on the overthrow of the governments of the world and world domination.
Well, for the first time in U.S. history, at least 15 states have either approved or introduced bills banning Sharia law, the Islamic legal code. In Tennessee, a proposed bill could make it a felony, punishable by up to 15 years in jail, for Muslims to perform everyday religious practices like praying, giving to charity or fasting, because that would be defined as banned Sharia practices. Also on Thursday, congressional hearings will start looking at the so-called radicalisation of Muslims in the U.S. So on today's show we ask, has the American Muslim community become the target of a political witch hunt in the post-9/11 era? Remember, you can join our conversation by sending an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, joining us from California is the renowned Muslim intellectual Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. After the 9/11 attacks in the US, Sheikh Hamza emerged as a respected Islamic scholar advising both the White House and the Arab League. In recent years, he's focused his teachings on countering the widening gap between the Muslim world and the West. He's also the founder and chairman of the Zaytuna Institute based in California. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, good to have you on the show again.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Well, first of all, I want to refer to those sound bites from the opening of the show. You heard a number of people, obviously some clear prejudices there, and I wonder, what is it that allows people in the US to talk about Islam in this way, and yet if it had been any other religion they'd been talking about, there would have been quite an outcry?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think Bill Maher on a regular basis says things that anybody else, had they said them about any other group, say, for instance, Jews or blacks or other minorities or even religious groups, they would have lost their job by now. But I think it shows you the extent of the acceptable nature of just being anti-Arab, being anti-Muslim. So, unfortunately, it's deeply disturbing for those of us who have families who, for instance, many people's wives wear traditional clothing when they go out, or at least a head covering with Western style clothing. But increasingly we're seeing this antagonism in the United States, and I think it's a result of many now since 9/11 it's been just unrelenting attacks on talk radio, an incredible number of books that have come out against Islam. One of the things, and I think Pat Robertson displayed that in his statement just now, that this idea that Islam somehow is an ideology, that it's a political system as opposed to being a world religion. And I think 1,400 years of Islamic history completely denies that ridiculous assumption.
Let me get an email to you, if I may, that came in from South Africa, from Cape Town. And Cameron Peter wrote in saying, have Muslims replaced the Cold War communist bogeyman in the American psyche?
It's a good point. I think there was a book written, John Stockwell, a former CIA operative, wrote a book called In Search of Enemies. And one of the things that we've noted in the United States is, despite the declining purchasing power of the dollar, despite the spiraling debt, the one sacred cow of the American deficit or budget is military spending, and military spending is actually at Cold War numbers, and if you adjust it for inflation, it's quite stunning what's happened, and that's all been justified by the war on terror. More people died in the United States last year from dog bites than died from terrorist attacks. Less than 3 people. Many of these attacks, in fact, according to the FBI, are actually done by fundamentalist Christians against abortion doctors and things like that. So I think there's just an immense overblown aspect to this whole thing that to me is deeply troubling, because I think things get very distorted. They call it the media magnifying glass that can really distort a threat or distort some statistical insignificance out there into something very significant.
Now, of course, we've got 15 states here in the US targeting Sharia law. What do you see as the consequences of that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's an immense amount of misunderstanding about what Sharia is. There are only 2 sections in any traditional text on sacred law that deal with governance, and that only involves government agencies. They're called ahkam al-sultaniya. Sharia is mostly about purification, about prayer, about fasting, about paying your zakat, a poor tax, to help the poor and disenfranchised. That is the bulk of the Sharia. The idea that you have to enact laws in the United States to prevent Sharia from being established or enacted is absurd, because the Constitution of the United States already states that that is the basis of the law of the land. So anything that is from Sharia that would be considered unconstitutional is ipso facto unacceptable in the United States. And I think to me, one of the interesting things about this is that one area that is applicable in the United States is Islamic commercial law that prohibits a lot of the financial instruments that are out there causing devastating effects on Americans. And I think it's very interesting that certainly the bankers would not want that aspect of Islam to become widespread knowledge amongst American people, the prohibition of exploitative financial instruments, and the fact that a lot of usury laws that still exist in the United States are completely ignored. They go into states like the Dakotas where they don't have usury laws, and so these credit card companies can completely exploit people, when I think in the 19th century Americans would have been up in arms about a lot of what's going on now.
We had another email. I'm going to put this to you, if I may. This came in from Chicago in the USA, where Oshua Ryan wrote in saying, I think the US values the contributions of Muslim communities and respects them, but does not condone or nor accept the practices of Sharia law that goes against the legal and democratic principles of a modern, civilized societies of the 21st century. Now, I'm wondering, if you've had any contact with the United States government. I know you advise the government regularly on these kind of issues, on this issue of targeting the Sharia law, and how, if you have, you've advised them.
Well, I haven't actually, but I would say, first of all, again, the Sharia is not a threat to the United States Constitution or the United States law. Many of the things in Islamic law are rational. They're completely compatible with Western ideas. I think what people focus on are certain penal codes, that much of which in the Islamic law is not agreed upon, but there are certain aspects of the Sharia. But even if you examine the Sharia, you'll find that it's actually profoundly nuanced. I think people see things like Nigeria, a woman being threatened of being stoned because of adultery or something like that. And these are, I think, the unfortunate trials and tribulations of having certain pre-modern conceptions that were quite normative in the pre-modern world that Muslims still adhere to in the modern world. And so places like Iran, where they do implement certain punishments that I think in the spirit of the Sharia would not be implemented in this day and age. You can't cut off the hands of people in consumer societies that we live in today. So there are many aspects of the Sharia, I think, that are just completely distorted. And another aspect that I think is really important is the fact that in the United States, by and large, you have a population of civil people. In fact, I think the demonstration that happened in Yorba Linda is an anomaly. I think the majority of Americans are decent people that acknowledge multiculturalism. America has always been a multicultural society. We have Amish people that don't use technology in the United States. There's no iPhones or iPads in Amish land. And so America has always allowed for people to explore alternative lifestyles as long as you do not go against the laws of the land. And that is Sharia. If you live in America, you have to follow American law. That is Sharia.
I'm going to bring in a caller, actually, who's been waiting on the line from Bangladesh. Rashid, thank you for being with us. What would you like to ask Sheikh Hamza Yusuf?
Hi, Riz. Hi, Hamza. Hope you're nice. Actually, in my experience, I found that in all the states in USA, all the religious people from different culture, they are doing their religious activities very nicely. But my question is, after 1/11, is there the Muslims or any other religious people facing any problem to do their religious activities very freely?
Okay, so the impact of 9/11, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, what Rashid is asking is, following 9/11, have you seen any actual restrictions on people being able to practice their religion?
I think that in terms of travel, there has been problems for people that are Muslim. I think the government, to be fair, has tried to redress these oversights. Generally, though, I think American Muslims need to acknowledge the fact that there are still more hate crimes against the Jewish community, which is a profoundly enfranchised community in the United States. But there are still more hate crimes against the Jewish community than there are against the Muslim community. But what's troubling is the sentiment that has been increasing, and we're seeing a type of virulence of this attitude that's definitely on the increase. While there are not a lot of hate crimes against the Muslims, there are, and there have been mosques that have been attacked, even a few that have been burnt. Pigs' heads have been thrown in mosques, things like that. But generally, the Muslims, I think, have been protected in their houses and their homes. I think the FBI, despite some of the entrapment problems that have occurred, has tried to keep the Muslim community safe. So I want to be fair, and I do think that overall the Muslims are still in a good condition in the United States, but this constant barrage of attacks and presenting Islam as an evil religion, and the talk show radio hosts that day in and day out talk about this, these things take an effect, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. There is an acceptable attitude towards Muslims. Be critical of Islam. People can be critical of Islam. But the idea of mocking people, of attacking them, of calling them demonically inspired terrorists, that the Quran breeds terrorism, these things are just untruths that are being spread around as gospel.
Okay. Let me ask you to take a call from Oliver in Virginia, who's also been waiting patiently. Oliver, thanks. Go ahead.
Do you think that this reflection has going to be another Western countries for the Muslims especially?
Okay, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, is there likely to be a parallel of what we're seeing in the USA and other countries? Now, we've seen it, of course, in parts of Europe.
Well, I think it's actually worse in Europe. I think that there is far more Islamophobia in Europe than there is in the United States. First of all, the Muslim community in Europe is far more disenfranchised than the Muslim community in the United States. I think Canada probably has the best record as far as I can tell. I think there's a lot of effort to allow the Muslim community to flourish in Canada. I think England has also tried to address these problems. Unfortunately, with the new government, there's been certain attitudes that are being presented. France has some really frightening aspects to what's going on there, and also in Germany and in other places. So the immigration to Europe, which was largely a labor immigration, people needed to rebuild Europe after the Cold War. There was a lot after the World War II. There was a lot of people brought into Europe from Pakistan and from Africa, and because these people were largely labor people, they were marginalized, they were ghettoized, and there's also a mentality that goes with that. So I think, unfortunately, in Europe, you've had a lot of social problems that we don't have in the United States. Okay. The immigrant community to the United States, the Muslim immigrant community, is one of the most successful communities in the history of American immigration. Mm-hmm. And I think part of this pushback right now is very consistent with immigration patterns in American history. Americans have always been provincial about a new group that comes into America, and have made it very difficult for them to become part of the American tapestry. So I think in some ways this is kind of an initiation into welcome to America.
John in D.C. is with us. John, go ahead.
Yes, people need to realize that in America, politics on the right is based on hatred. To get people to follow you, you must have an issue that they all can agree to hate, and Muslims are the latest victims of that. And also the 2.5% give back of the Muslim religion is much feared by the wealthy in America.
Okay, John, thank you for that. I'm going to add to what you're saying there with a comment about U.S. Congressman Peter King, who, as you know, Sheikh Hamza is behind a controversial move to investigate what he believes to be the radicalization of American Muslims. Now, I want to have our viewers and yourself listen to what he said about the reasons for these hearings before the House Homeland Security Committee.
The main purpose of this hearing also is to protect the Muslim community. I will have Muslims testifying tomorrow showing how they're intimidated in their own communities, how Al-Qaeda is radicalizing, and when they go to their leaders in the community, the leaders tell them to keep quiet. The leaders attempt to obstruct investigations. What do you see
coming out of these hearings, Sheikh Hamza?
Well, I think the previous caller made a good comment. The far right in the country, and I don't want to lump all the right together. There's people like Benjamin Weicker out there who are real conservatives that I actually respect, and so it's for me. I don't want to get into the melodramatic attitude of pure evil and pure good here. The left is good, the right is bad. I think in the secular left you'll find people that really hate Islam as well. In terms of King's hearings right now, we have a problem in the United States, undeniably. We've seen what they call homegrown terrorism. Some of it has been entrapment, undoubtedly, but unfortunately we had a lot of these people are individuals or a few people acting. They're not in a true sense of the definition that the State Department gives of terrorism. These are individuals acting out. I mean, we had a man that flew into an IRS building with his airplane, and that was not considered a terrorist act, even though he was protesting the high taxes in the United States and was influenced by a certain political ideology. On the other hand, somebody asked Bill Maher if his name was, or Bill Maher asked somebody if his name was Muhammad, would it be terrorism? And everybody kind of went silent. So I think anything that Muslims do right now, it's not seen as a lone nutcase. If the man in Arizona had been a Muslim, it would have been an act of terrorism, but instead it's looked at as a kind of isolated insanity. One of the things Nietzsche said that insanity is unusual in individuals, but it's common in groups. And so unfortunately we do have these small groups that behave in an insane manner, and instead of dealing with them and addressing the issues as a type of anomaly, I think the right is trying to lump these small groups of disenfranchised, very angry, hateful people into the greater Islamic community, and that is unjust. I find that deeply troubling. You cannot lump these people into the Islamic community. Okay. We have probably around 50,000 Muslim doctors in the United States that are treating people. People are putting their lives on the line with these doctors and trusting them, and this is going on every single day in the United States. Now, and people need to remember that.
Now, just a day ago, there was an article in the Washington Post by Asra Nomani, a Muslim academic and writer, who says that perhaps the King hearings are a good thing because she feels there is radicalization in the U.S. Muslim community and that it's about time it's explored and revealed. Now, I wonder what validity there is, in your opinion, of this idea of talking openly about this, perhaps just getting it all out in the open, and perhaps these hearings could produce something positive.
Well, I think there is some radicalization. There certainly, we had some of the East African community in the United States that were immigrants that went back to Somalia and ended up involved in whatever was going on over there. There's been plots that have been foiled, undeniably. But again, these are individuals or small groups that do not reflect the overall Muslim community. And I think the problem with highlighting and focusing on these, instead of seeing them as just criminality that needs to be prevented, and by politicizing them, you end up creating this sense that, oh, my next door neighbor's a terrorist, Ghulam or Ahmed or Abdullah down the road, and you see a Muslim in a scarf and suddenly fear is created. I think that's where I have a deep problem with what's going on, because it demonizes a group. And the definition of enfranchisement is when the whole group is not blamed for the actions of individuals. When an individual does something in the United States who happens to be a Muslim, the entire community is still affected by that. And until that changes, I think people need to have more responsibility and an awareness that they have a civil duty not to create these types of scare tactics. And one really important point is this has immense impact on America's image abroad in the Muslim world. This country has profound interests in the Muslim world. We are still dependent on foreign oil, and there are powerful ties to the Muslim world. And if you demonize the Muslims, not only does it make it acceptable to, say, attack a place like Iran, which I'm deeply troubled by that possibility, but because innocent people end up being terrorized over there. And that's another problem, because that creates more extremism. So I think it's really important to remember that there are international implications to what's going on.
I'm going to squeeze in a call from Somalia. Wesley, thanks for being with us. Go ahead, Wesley.
I didn't mean to offend Somalia.
Yes,
Go ahead.
my question is, I've heard so many times a discussion about Islamophobia in the United States. Will it not be fair to also have a discussion about the way minorities and Christians are being treated from Pakistan to the Middle East?
Sheikh Hamza?
In the Middle East?
I guess, yeah. If you take.
Are you saying the mistreatment?
I think that's the
the mistreatment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is a common. I think this is very common amongst Muslims. Is that we do have a double standard. We kind of attack the West, but we tend to ignore the very serious problems in our own countries, in Muslim majority countries. So I think he's bringing up a very good point. I personally am horrified by a lot of the attitudes towards South Asians in certain areas in the Middle East. Undeniably, the way that Filipino maids have been treated, the way that workers are treated in some of the countries is deeply troubling. So, yeah, I think that we need to get out of a tribal mentality. We need to get out of tribalism and really address issues as right and wrong issues. And I think if we use a rational basis for doing a lot of that I think we can agree on a lot of things on both sides. But unfortunately, emotionalism and tribalism, and tribalism can be America, we're number one, is a type of tribalism. I think Beni Islam, the idea that my tribe right or wrong, Muslims are always right, Kafirs are always wrong. These type of attitudes, which I define as melodramatic, are very problematic in a world that's becoming increasingly interdependent. So we really need to start attempting, to the best of our ability, to transcend some of these attitudes.
Now, Sheikh Hamza, I just have 1 minute now. You mentioned the protests on the February the 13th in Orange County. When you have people just coming out, there's a charity group, Muslim charity group, doing work there, and you get a protest that's anti-Muslim. Just in less than a minute, how do you engage with people like that, where there seems to be a blind hatred and prejudice?
Well, I think, to be fair to these people, they're frightened. One of the speakers apparently was known for some extreme statements, and I think they have YouTube. That's on the YouTube, even though that was not what that charity fundraiser was about. But I think people are scared. A lot of people left that protest when they started getting aggressive in their verbal abuse of the people. There were children present, things like that. So a lot of the people just left, and it was down to a few hundred people. But I think it's important for Muslims to acknowledge, in the same way I think it's important for Americans to acknowledge a lot of the pain of Muslims, I think it's important for Muslims in the United States to acknowledge a lot of the fear that many Americans have.
Well, Sheikh Hamza, I'm sorry we have no more time, but thank you so much for your contribution to the show today.
Okay, well, thank you, Riz. All the best to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us too with your questions. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook, see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on topics and post your questions and comments. On the next Riz Khan show, a close-up look at the Libya uprising. Celebrated and controversial French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy has just returned from Libya and joins us to share his experience. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.